Hello. There we go.
Yeah.
Just make sure you're awake. Maybe the subject's a little too heavy for this early in the morning. Maybe we should postpone, have a drink, and come back at noon. To me, this could be one of the more important conversations of the entire week. In that you're combining high tech with the saving of lives, literal saving of lives. So I don't know quite what could be more important. I'm going to let these guys give you a brief one-sentence introduction of who they are and the work they do, and then we're going to talk about some successes and failures around the world in regard to tech and humanitarian needs. So maybe Gaia, you go first.
Definitely. So good morning, everybody. I'm Gaia van der Esch. I'm the Deputy Director of Impact, which is a think and do tank based in Geneva, focusing on doing research in the humanitarian sector to inform the response of UN agencies and donors. So we have over 400 staff collecting data, doing impact monitoring and evaluation and assessments in over 20 countries where there is heavy conflict or heavy crisis.
Good morning. I'm Sam Worthington. I'm the CEO of Interaction, and we're the largest alliance of U.S. NGOs. Our members manage about $15 billion a year. It's roughly the same scale as the UN system, and we're part of the world's humanitarian infrastructure that impacts, at this point, millions of people.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Ritz. I am Vice President of WaterGen. We are an Israel-based technology company. We produce drinking water from the air. We have 3 size units. We have a large unit that produces up to 6,000 units of water a day, liters. We have a mid-size unit of 650 liters per day that could service schools and hospitals. And we have a consumer unit. We are producing this product as a commercial company because we feel it is our responsibility in the private sector to tackle the global water crisis and ensure that there is clean and safe drinking water for all around the world.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Opp. I'm the Director of Innovation and Change at the United Nations World Food Programme. The World Food Programme is the agency of the United Nations responsible for providing food assistance, which we do for about 80 to 100 million people each year. We're present in over 80 countries. Our operating budget is about $6 billion. We have a large physical supply chain, and we're also a large cash provider for people in markets in places where there are functioning markets, and we provide cash as a means of food assistance.
I want to just quickly ask Amanda, how do you get water from the air?
It is a system, a dehumidification system that we draw the humidity from the air. Ideal conditions is at 27 degrees Celsius with 60% humidity is ideally, and basically we draw the humidity out of the air, we filter the water within the system, and then it produces clean and safe drinking water. It's an immediate solution, and it's a permanent solution.
And it's working.
Yes, it is working. Yeah. In fact, most recently, we have been working with FEMA and the American Red Cross. We were asked to deploy our units first to Houston for hurricane relief to assist community members because there was a contaminated water reservoir in Texas. And then, unfortunately, we were then asked to deploy to Florida after the hurricane hit Florida.
Yeah. Well, given the kind of preponderance and seeming increase of disasters around the world, who's busiest today? Which one of you guys is most in the field, or are you equally out there?
It depends on the context, I guess.
I would say the World Food Programme as a single entity has one of the deepest networks in the field in all of the emergencies that you hear about. So not only do we have about 20 million people on the brink of famine and starvation across 4 countries. That's Yemen, northeastern Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan. We actually have the whole Syria refugee crisis, 5 million Syrians living outside the borders of Syria and several more displaced inside. We have the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is starting to implode again, unfortunately. We have 1.5 million people displaced as a result of that. So we are struggling to keep up with demand, as it were.
Well, just using the Congo as an example, what is the tech component of the work, and how has it changed in recent years?
Well, okay, using Congo as an example, we are active when there's a situation of conflict and population movement. The way that we understand where people are going, what they need, we need to understand how people are being impacted and how to assess what they need. In these kinds of circumstances, we've been leveraging a lot of satellite imagery, drones if we have them, unmanned aerial vehicles that collect images, that we're able to sort of see population movements. We're also moving into call detail records provided by telecom companies that allow us to see where people are moving with their phones. But that's all been in place for a few years now. I think the exciting thing about what we're doing now is to look at, if you take the example of satellite imagery, currently we have people who monitor those satellite images manually. They sit at a screen, they look at things, they look at informal settlements and how they've changed over time. But we're actually looking at artificial intelligence-powered platforms that can help do that in an automatic way. So we can, instead of monitoring a finite number of images because it's limited by your manual ability to do that, training machines to recognize what's happening in those images and where the patterns are, drawing the correlations, and then helping make recommendations to us.
And Sam, you have...
I mean, the UN system in many ways sits on the NGO structure, which is then operating locally. So you've got this infrastructure of nonprofits. A big NGO will impact 60 to 80 million people. And you're doing this, bringing 700 tons of wheat into northern Syria to basically feed the population north of the country. So you're operating in war zones in very difficult environments at some degree of scale. And that's the scale's the important thing, because it's not feeding 100,000 people, it's 1 million people, or access to water for 1 million people, and so forth. We have the largest famine since World War II facing us. The response of the world has alleviated the pressure there, but the real challenge is the gap between the degree of the scale of the humanitarian response and the problem is getting bigger and bigger. In 38 countries, there are 141 million people in severe humanitarian crisis. And the world's response has upped the ante, but we can't meet that crisis. The actors on the ground are the UN and the NGOs and local actors. Most of the local actors at a certain point crack, and you need the international system to come in to make a difference in people's lives. So the challenge is there some way to up the ante to increase our service in these areas? And the limitations we face is that we are inherently conservative, because you don't want people to fail fast and fail safe if the disruption means people are starving to death. So you have this need to apply technology to increase your scale rapidly in environments with people living on less than $1 a day, often in conflict zones where you have limited access and where your presence on the ground is actually saving people from being killed. So we've begun to use technology, but where you use it and how you use it is critical. Drone technology is critical to get vaccines, blood, and so forth. In another context, drone technology is associated with bombing, and there's no way you could use drones.
And do you at the maybe at the beginning of your day or the end of your day, do you worry that soon or at some point in the near future the demand is going to outweigh your ability to keep up, or are we there already?
We're there already. We're in a triage moment right now, and these crises only become real when they hit the West. So you got 1 million refugees coming to Europe. Well, that's out of 65 million displaced people. We notice it when it comes here, not when it's elsewhere. So we're in a triage moment where you're deciding, are you allowing people to die in Central African Republic or the Congo or Yemen or other places? That's where the world is at this point. However, said that, you could be optimistic because we know what interventions work. We know how to scale things. We're using data in new ways. We have access. I think one of the biggest breakthroughs we've seen is cash. By getting mobile money out, even if it's a few dollars a day, you're providing, where there are markets, enough resources for people to feed themselves. So getting cash out in large amount to millions of people is very different than the food distribution systems where you're using, in this case, markets and cash, rather than simply bringing food in and disrupting markets. So yes, the gap is there. At the same time, I think there is some hope in closing it, but we do need the private sector's help.
That's funny because I've been reading a lot the last few days about private sector having stashed some of its earnings on islands that, maybe some of that could be freed up and sent your way.
One big goal of the NGO community is always transparency and where resources go. In this case, it's not going to be the UN and the NGO sector, and we can't just build walls to keep people out. Ultimately, we're going to have to go where the root of these problems are, which means investment in the well-being of people and solutions that will help their lives.
Yeah. And then Gaia, how does your work fit in with this?
Yes. So our work, it's quite different, I would say, in the sense that we're indeed focusing on collecting data and understanding what's happening. So imagine that we are in a sudden onset, so in a catastrophe, natural catastrophe. We have a big earthquake or a cyclone, or we're in the middle of the war. We often, as humanitarian actors, don't have much access. And also at the very beginning, often a big crisis, we don't know what's happening, right? We don't know where people displaced to, how many are there, what are the priority needs. So the work that our teams do at a field level is really to collect good quality information and good quality data to be able to then tell UN agencies, NGOs, and donors, okay, so you should prioritize food over water, or you should prioritize shelter, and there is an isolated population there that you need to manage to reach out to. And this is really like a research focused type of work. We, of course, also use technology within our daily work. Typically, satellite imagery is something we use very regularly. There is a UN agency dedicated to satellite imagery, which is a funding partner with which we work. We use also drones, of course. We use mobile technology, smartphones, to collect data. So this seems quite as an old technology, but it's actually something that was really a big breakthrough. We used to all collect data on paper forms and then enter every single data from thousands and thousands of households we would interview. So this really enabled us to then do much quicker analysis of the data that we have, give much quicker results to the humanitarian community. So nowadays we have huge networks of informants. For example, we have over 1,000 informants in Syria, even in places that are besieged. So we have informants in Raqqa, and we're able to get information out in 48, 72 hours and be able to say, okay, this is what's happening in Raqqa, there are these bombings, these are the priority needs, Raqqa has been emptied, or no, there's still population in this area. So then typically humanitarian agencies can target the response. So this is more or less how we integrate technology. But I think just also to mention that we do integrate, of course, technology, but we're very late adopters. If you look at the curve of technology, what we're using collectively is technology that probably 20 years ago was used and invented in the private sector. And the way more recent technologies that we haven't integrated yet, because indeed we are risk adverse. There is a risk of integrating technology if it fails. If it fails, it means we can't support people. And also if it fails, of course, it means that we've invested money, time, resources, and energy that has been taken away from delivering aid for something that didn't work.
What would be a small example of a technology that failed?
Yeah. So for example, I think we were having this discussion before, the drone example is a good example in the sense that it's not necessarily that the technology per se that fails, but it's the context in which you can or can't use it. So we sometimes just go and we say, okay, we have this technology, let's use it, but in the specific country, in the specific context, it's something that will be perceived by beneficiaries as a threat and not as something that is there to support, to provide aid, and it might even be, attacked, or it might create discomfort. So that's where it's very important to contextualize the tech innovations that we have and understand it's not the tech per se that it's an issue, but it's how will it be used in a specific context, and also what are the ethical questions around it, right, that we need to ask ourselves.
And Rob, I like these conversations to focus on hope as much as possible. Is there something in your recent experience that shines a light on a hopeful?
Yeah. I agree with what Gaia said, but I would just say that in the last few years, I've noticed that there is a real trend toward a more embracing of technology among this sector and these agencies. So, Gaia was saying that we're kind of 20 years behind. Not in all cases, and I see agencies moving quickly. So, for example, we talked about we're using now mobile phones to reach people where before all we had was pencil and paper. Now we reach them by mobile phones, but that's already kind of a few years old. We're now looking at how we would use chatbots to reach people. Because very soon people will have smartphones, they will be connected by internet, you will be able to interface with them on a one-to-one basis, and using the same kind of customer service platforms that are introduced in the corporate world, we can reach people and hear voices individually. Another example is blockchain, and we are experimenting with blockchain. We have a functioning blockchain that is underpinning the digital voucher program that we had that provides a cash transfer for people in Jordan. This is active in 10,000 Syrian refugees based in Jordan. And our blockchain is in some ways every bit as advanced as some of the private sector. So we are, I think, in a moment where this sector is starting to more quickly embrace these kinds of innovations in a way that has to be, of course, measured against our governance environment, which, as Sam said, is quite conservative. But we're finding ways to run that experimentation and sprint quickly ahead while maintaining our concerns and controls and that risk averseness.
And Amanda, we were talking earlier about your work on providing water. Where does clean drinking water fall in the importance of issues when it comes to these crises, one by one?
Well, basically, water is a fundamental need for all of us in every facet of our lives. And given that my partner here is with the UN, we all know that there are UN Sustainability Development Goals, objectives to reach by 2030. Yeah, you have your little pin.
I have the pin.
And we were discussing clean water, and access to clean and safe drinking water is number 6 on that list. But there are 17 sustainability development goals. And if you think about it, contaminated water affects health. It affects the livelihood of women, because in many distressed countries, women are bringing their small children to go find a water source. It's keeping women out of the workforce. It's affecting health. It's affecting schooling for these young children. It's affecting employment and economies. So water is across the spectrum. For example, we just finished a pilot in India for a month. We did a water ATM in New Delhi in Connaught Place. We were providing drinking water from the air for 2,000 people a day who were coming to Connaught Place to have some water. We are also in the Philippines. We are in China. We're in Thailand. We're across the globe trying to work with this global water crisis. It affects every piece of everyone's life. And at the end of the day, time is the saving of human lives. Time is money. It affects economies of every country in the world. So it is an immediate concern, and we have the permanent solution.
Well, can you bring it to the United States? Because I think 1 out of every 4 Americans does not have access to clean drinking water.
Well, what happened recently, a lot of statistics are coming out. The difficulties in the United States go from poor infrastructure, the water pipes breaking down, which is problems across the world. That's a problem in the Philippines, where we're also in the Philippines. It has to do with the problem in Flint, Michigan, which is still unresolved. It has to do with drought in California. So we are speaking with U.S. government agencies, and we hope to be moving forward. We in the United States, we have a separate company, WaterGen USA, and we hope to be moving forward and helping there as well.
And is there a worst case scenario going forward where even the highest of tech can't keep up with the disasters that are coming around, or?
Let me go to I mean, there is some extent we're living the worst case, but let me focus on the silver lining of this all.
Yeah.
At no time in human history, in the lives of anyone at this conference, has human welfare been better off. We've learned how to decrease infant mortality. We've learned how to extend life expectancy. We learned how to get more girls in schools. We've learned how to provide greater access to water. Humanity is seeing its best period in terms of reducing global poverty, but also access to resources. That's the good news. And that is because of technology, it's because of jobs, it's because of resources, it's because of the UN, the NGO sector. We've learned some core lessons since World War II on how to improve human well-being. The challenge is in 37 countries, in conflict areas, all those successes don't work. And so the root cause of famine in this world and so forth is not a drought. We know how to deal with droughts. We know how to get food banks. We know how to handle those type of things. What we don't know how to handle is in the midst of a crisis as war where someone's starving to death because a government or an armed actor is intentionally doing so. So our challenge in those environments is to tap what works. And the good news there is that in any refugee camp, in any war zone, markets still work. There are still individuals. The first thing that pops up in a refugee camp is a infrastructure to charge cell phones on a fee basis so that people have connectivity. This desire to be connected, this desire to have access to resources, to be part of a market, we've learned that that's the center of things. So for the NGO sector, our center reality is not the government, the UN. In many ways, it's the private sector. How can we value chains reach way down into systems? Are there ways in conflicts environments that an individual might be able to, with their phone, be able to have access to resources they haven't had before? So I think that's the duality we live, and what we need is the world to pay attention to those 141 million people living in those acute crises as we recognize we're improving human well-being in ways that we've never had before.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. This references I guess the media is how do you keep these incidences in front of people? I mean, is it when you've got so many different things going on simultaneously around the world?
So I think there is a disaster fatigue, a sense of sort of, you know, there's all these horrible things happening. I could do something here. I gave once. Let me stop. But I think deeper than that is we've persuaded ourselves that we can't do anything. And the reality is someone goes, well, how do you feed people inside Syria? How do you get medical supplies within a complex environment? We've learned how to do these things. We've learned how to get girls back in school after they've been displaced, in a very poor environment. So the infrastructure is there. The world pays attention when those disasters hit ourselves. And in many ways, we persuade ourselves not to engage the level we have because we don't think it might work. And the reality is, if some of the optimism of this conference and what you can do with technology was brought to this sector, I know that we could further narrow the gap in a way that we have done and very positively over the past generation.
And Gaia, how does that apply at a more local level? Where do you find your optimism?
Yeah, I think at a local level, definitely there is a lot of impact that we can have with technology. First of all, we can be more lean ourselves as organizations, right? If you look at, again, maybe I'm exaggerate to make a point, but we often still use Excel at a local level to do all our finances, all our admin, all our HR, and we all have as organizations support costs, right? Which is costs that go to the beneficiaries. So if we would already be much more tech friendly in our processes and in what tools we use as an organization, we could save money and actually have a bigger impact at a local level by being more efficient in terms of staffing, in terms of functions that could be automated to a certain extent. So definitely there is a scope from this perspective, from the analysis perspective, from the supply chain. There's a lot of scope at local level to become more cost efficient through technology. Yeah. But I think a very important thing to keep in mind is that finally we exist as a humanitarian sector to help people that are in the midst of a crisis. And there is also risk, that's my feeling, that with technology we have more and more means of not needing or not being required to go in the middle of a crisis, right? Because we might be able to collect all the data we need through phones, through satellite imagery. We might be able to supply aid through drones, through cross transfers. So this means that maybe at some point, humanitarian workers, again, to be extreme, could no longer be needed because we would have tools and ways of delivering aid. And I think this is a real risk because as much as it's great to improve through tech, there is a need of a human contact, right? And we need to make sure that when we integrate tech, it's not to become a tech-centered industry, it's to use tech as a mean of improving what we do while maintaining this human contact. This means that we need to maintain our teams in the field. Having humanitarian workers in the field in most contexts, having NGOs staff, is a protection for the people that are in the middle of a conflict. So it's really important to keep this human-centered approach, also for tech companies looking at working with us, to really understand that's our aim and it's our purpose. And it shouldn't lean too much towards a tech-only centered approach.
Rob wanted to chime in.
I just wanted to say, completely agree with that. We see technology primarily as an augmentation of what is already there. So not to replace what's on the ground, not to replace the role of face-to-face interaction with people. We never want to do that or never should do that. But really, it's a way of expanding or really just being able to gather more, to augment, to make it beyond. I give you the example of the, we went from face-to-face surveys only with people to mobile phone, SMS surveys, and I just mentioned that we were going to chatbots. None of them, they're all additive. None of them are to be substituted. So it's just a way of getting more voices included. And that really gives me a lot of hope as we move toward really a truly connected globe where everyone will have the means to communicate with anyone. It's finding then navigating our way to make sure that we're gathering the voices that we need to have to be able to do our work more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Well, given that we're surrounded by the top levels of tech here, does anybody have a request? Is there something you'd like to see the tech world come up with that could help you?
Well, I'm going to add what our tech company is doing, and I think, because we talked about hope and what could be missing, emergency preparedness and awareness are things that go together but don't. And we mentioned this earlier. Humanitarian causes sometimes come out of emergencies. But when we were deployed to for hurricane relief, it was in response to an emergency. However, take a few steps back. Sometimes emergencies can be avoided with awareness and education. And just a question to the audience, how many people here turn off the water when they brush their teeth? Okay, probably better than a few years ago. How many people know how much energy is consumed by the drinking water you have in your house, the cost of it? Do people know what the efficiency of the water is, the cost efficiency is for the water in your home? See, these are numbers that most people don't know. WaterGen is producing the most cost-efficient, energy-efficient solution for drinking water. Think about how many plastic bottles. Even here, they're giving out bottles of water. There's a cost for every plastic bottle that people are drinking. So a lot of this is awareness, how much money is saved, how many lives can be saved with better solutions, more efficient solutions, and WaterGen has that solution.
Rob,
yeah, I have a broad appeal, which is we see the most amazing technologies being developed in Silicon Valley, in Lisbon, in Berlin, and other places, but they're not extending or naturally extending into the parts of the world where people could really benefit. Rather than having a more optimized delivery of groceries to your doorstep, we could be making African food markets more efficient. And so the broad appeal is for those of you who are in developing technologies and in industries that have developed great bases of technology but could be applicable elsewhere, find partners like us that we can work together and try to extend those and almost democratize those technologies to other parts of the world so that we can see them be able to participate and benefit from those.
Sam?
So pick your favorite NGO, Save the Children Care or Oxfam, World Vision, Docs Without Borders, whatever the NGO. Think of human-centered design. Don't design things up here in the West. Work with them to design something in a very complex environment. They are trying to solve problems about human access to some of the basic dignity that they need to have. Work with them in that design. They are working with multinationals, with value chains, with the UN, others, any tool they have to extend their impact. This is no longer about just a few NGO projects. It's about an enormous effort by humanity to improve its well-being, and the center of the design needs to be on people.
Well, on that note, thank you, Rob, Amanda, Sam, Gaia, and you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.